Well, hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to Math. Happy Tuesday. I hope you're having a wonderful day. You're staying healthy, you're staying hydrated, and you're ready to learn and you're excited. Hello. Today, mixed numbers in story problems. This is hopefully one of the lessons that is going to kind of really feel real. Often when we're asked to deal with fractions in the real world, whether it's building or cooking or measuring or anything like that, often we're asked to look at mixed numbers and deal with mixed numbers. So a whole number plus a fraction, something that falls in between those whole numbers on our number line. And also, I completely lost my train of thought. Wow, we're off to a great start. Not only will you have to deal with mixed numbers, but you're going to deal with, I remember where it is, we're back on. We're, not only are you going to deal with mixed numbers, but you're going to deal with really kind of a small number of denominators, right? We're not often going to see twelfths or sevenths or 18ths or 59ths in the real world. Those just aren't reasonable or common ways to break a quantity down into equal groups. We're most often going to see things like halves, thirds, fourths, eighths, sixteenths, right? Or what we talked about yesterday are tenths and hundredths. So we're going to be looking at a couple of real life situations today, one of them as a whole class and then another one in your exit ticket. And really thinking about and following those three reads down there to help solve story problems. And when you encounter a situation where you're going to need math in the real world, the three reads are still applicable, okay? We can always, when we get to a situation where we need math, think about, okay, first, what's going on in this story? What's going on right now, right? If I'm baking cupcakes, okay, there's my situation. There's my first read. Okay, now I need to know what the quantities are and what those quantities represent. Okay, and then for our third read, I need to know what the unknown is and what operations might help me in order to solve those unknowns. Okay, and then here's what you're going to need, something to write on, something to write with, as usual. So really thinking about our reading comprehension skills here when we're dealing with story problems, because when we are reading a fiction book or reading an informational text, right? We're doing a lot of the same things. We're trying to, particularly with narrative, with fiction, with stories. We're starting with, okay, what's going on here? Let me get a sense of the story. Let me think about the setting. Let me, turn my mind movie on and envision what's going on here. The same is true with math in that first read, right? What's going on in the story? Visualize the scenario. As I scoot closer, visualize the scenario that you're given. Okay? If I'm baking cupcakes, I want to be able to see when I close my eyes. I want to be able to see all my ingredients out on the counter. I want to see measuring cups. What do your measuring cups look like? And then that gives me a better idea of the steps that I'm going to have to take to solve this problem. Okay? Second read, the quantities. What are our numbers? What do those numbers represent? Third read, what are the unknowns? What don't we know? What questions could be asked here? And then what operation, adding, subtracting, comparing, which is subtracting, multiplying, dividing, are we going to need in order to solve this problem? So let's look at our story of the day. It says this. Here's our first read. What's going on in the story? Glenview fifth graders are working in groups and keeping track of their miles walked during October. So far this month, Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. Izzy has walked 7 1/3 miles. Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles. And Mars has walked 6 2/3 miles. How many total miles have they walked this month? Right? First, what's going on in the story? Before we even worry about the quantities, before we even worry about how many miles they walked, we have to understand and visualize, okay, they've all walked some miles. And based on the question, how many total miles they've all walked some miles and they're keeping track of how many miles they walked. Maybe there's like a contest and they want to see who walked the most. Maybe they have to reach a goal of some kind. It doesn't say in the story, but we're thinking about those kind of questions because it gives us a better idea of what's going on in the story. In this case, there's fifth graders walking and they're keeping track of how many miles. Second read. Now let's think about our quantities and what do those quantities represent. Glenview fifth graders are working in groups and keeping track of their miles walked during October. So far this month, Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. Izzy has walked 7 1/3 miles. Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles, 4 1/4 miles. And Mars has walked 6 2/3 miles. How many total miles have they walked this month? Okay, so let's think about our quantities and our amounts. And then we're going to write down those quantities and what they represent. Okay, so let's start Glenview fifth graders. Well, fifth, it's kind of like a fraction, right? But no, I know from context, this isn't dealing with like 1/5 as a fraction. It's saying you're in the fifth grade. You're in year 5. Well, year 6 if you count kindergarten, but you know what I mean. We're in the fifth grade. We can disregard that number or that quantity. So it's not really a quantity, it's a name. Glenview fifth graders are working in groups and keeping track of their miles walked during October. So far this month, Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. Okay, I'm going to write that down. Violet has walked, go to my whiteboard here. Violet has walked, and I'm going to use a V to show that. Violet has walked 5 3/4, and then the abbreviation for miles is MI. Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. All right, let's go back to our problem. Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. Izzy has walked 7 1/3 miles. Okay, so let's go back to our whiteboard. Izzy, we'll use an I for that, has walked 7 1/3 miles. Okay, let's keep track. Let's keep going and see what other quantities we've done here. Izzy has walked 7 3/4 miles. Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles. 4 1/4. So let's put that on our notes here. Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles. Okay, now let's keep going. We're on a roll here. And Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles, and Mars has walked 6 2/3 miles. Let's make sure we get that down. Mars, or M, equals 6 2/3. Okay, and we're still dealing in miles here. So that's handy. We don't have to worry about multiple measurements. We don't have something in miles and something in feet because that complicates matters. So we're all dealing in miles, which is pretty good. Let's double check and make sure we don't have any other quantities. Mars has walked 6 2/3 miles. How many total miles have they walked this month? Okay, so we've got all of our quantities here. We've got Violet is 5 3/4. Izzy is 7 1/3. Gia is 4 1/4. Mars is 6 2/3. Okay, now let's reread for our third read and think about what don't we know and what operation are we going to use to figure it out. Glenview fifth graders are working in groups and keeping track of their miles walked during October. So far this month, Violet has walked 5 3/4 miles. Izzy has walked 7 1/3 miles. Gia has walked 4 1/4 miles. And Mars has walked 6 2/3 miles. How many total miles have they walked this month? So, what's our unknown? What's our question? How many total miles? When we hear that word total or in all, okay, that's our clue that simply put, we're going to add them all together. So let's take a look at our 4 quantities, and we're going to add all these together. So let's think about what's the best way, what way makes the most sense to add these together. I'm going to scoot it a little bit that way so we have a little bit more room for our notes here. What's the best way? Because I'm noticing there are fourths and thirds. So one way that, did I just move this off the screen? I did. One way, there we go. One way that we could solve this equation is to find common denominators and then add them all up. But I'm noticing something, and I'm remembering, what's our rule with the commutative property of addition? If I know I'm adding 5 3/4 plus 7 1/3 plus 4 1/4 plus 6 2/3. If I know that I'm adding all of these quantities up, let me move my face out of the way here. Whoops. There we go. If I know that I'm adding all of these quantities up, I can use the commutative property and say, hey, I can rearrange these addends and the sum's still going to stay the same. So why don't I put all my thirds together and put all my fourths together, and then, once I've done that, then I can add them up. Okay, so I'm going to move some things around here. So I'm going to rewrite it with my fourths on one side, or my fourths grouped together, and my thirds grouped together. So let's take the fourths first. So we have 5 3/4 plus, which one of these has fourths? 4 1/4. So that's going to be one part of my equation. Now let's add my thirds. 7 1/3 plus 6 2/3. Okay, so now I can add both of these up. So I'm going to use the separated out method. I'm going to add my whole numbers first. So 5 plus 4. 5 plus 4 equals 9. And then 3/4 plus 1/4. 3 plus 1 is 4 fourths. Wait a minute. What do we have here? We've got an equivalent of 1. So really, this is just 9 plus 1, isn't it? Huh, we ended up with a whole number. Check that out. So we ended up with a total of 10 miles with Gia and Violet's totals added together. 5 plus 4 is 9. 3/4 plus 1/4 equals 4 fourths, or 1. And then 9 plus 1 equals 10. Okay, so now let's do our thirds. So add your whole numbers first. That's what I'm going to do. If you like improper fractions, you could turn both of these into improper fractions and have 22 thirds plus 20, right? 22 thirds plus 20, 18 plus 2, 20, yeah, 20 thirds. But I like the whole numbers better. So 6 plus 7 is 13. And then 1/3 plus 2/3 is 3. Wait a minute. There's another equivalent of 1. So we can do 13 plus 1 is 14. Now, oh my gosh, now it's just adding two whole numbers together. 10 plus 14 is 24. And what was our unit that what's the thing that we're measuring? Miles. So they have walked a total of 24 miles. Zoop, there it is. All right. this is where really thinking about the whole problem comes in handy. Because if we had just taken it as it is and said, okay, I'm going to do 5 3/4 plus 7 1/3 plus 4 1/4 plus 6 2/3, what might have ended up happening is me doing a whole lot of extra work and going, okay, well, I'm going to turn 5 3/4 into 9/12, I'm going to turn 7 1/3 into 4/12, I'm going to turn 4 1/4 into 3/12, I'm going to turn 6 2/3 into 8/12, I'm going to add them all together, and I'm going to end up with 24/12, which, oh, that just makes 2. So I did all this extra work and all these extra steps where I could have made an error. Instead, I thought about the whole problem and said, oh, it's all adding, so I can rearrange them to make it easier on myself. Okay, that's part of not only being accurate, but being efficient with your math. Okay? And then we end up with a total of 24 miles. And you can see it says miles there. If I drag that over, whoops. There it is. Okay. So, on your exit ticket, really read the problem and think about what's going on. Okay? Are you going to have to add up and total all the quantities? Or are you going to have to do a little something different with the quantities in our exit tickets? Okay, so really think about and imagine the problem and put yourself in that situation, right? Put yourself in the situation of, okay, we're walking a bunch of miles and we need to figure out how many total. What's the easiest way to do that where we can be accurate? All right, the exit ticket, spoiler alert, it's about baking and the ingredients that go into baking some cookies. So imagine yourself in the kitchen with all your ingredients in front of you, and then read the problem, think about what's going on, and think about what you're going to have to do. All right, good luck. The Zoom room will be open in about 10 minutes at 11 o'clock for people who need questions answered. And have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you later this afternoon. No writing lesson on YouTube this afternoon. We're doing some independent writing on our fantasy fiction stories, and the Zoom room will be open for questions. All right, good luck, 5th graders. I believe in you, and have a wonderful rest of the morning.